Did you know that forests don't just grow on land? Beneath each of Canada's oceans lies one of the most productive and awe-inspiring ecosystems on the planet. This magical place is the Kelp Forest, and it's so important to the ocean. I'm Connel Bradwell, a wildlife conservationist in British Columbia.
And I'm Erica Porter, a fisher here in Nova Scotia.
We are the hosts for Coastlines, a CBC series that brings together young Canadians who are working to save our animals, plants and habitats on all three of Canada's coasts.
And today we're talking about kelp. Kelp forests thrive in cold, nutrient-rich waters, just like those here behind me in Nova Scotia. Now, if you're used to calling the seaweed, you're not wrong. It's one of those situations where all kelp is seaweed, but not all seaweed is kelp.
Kelp can be thought of as the trees of the ocean because of the role they play in forming complex three-dimensional habitats underwater, just like trees do here on land.
They are one of the most productive ecosystems in the world. Some species of kelp produce more biomass annually per meter squared than tropical rainforests. That's so cool. The first time I heard that, I was like, dang, I am studying a really cool species.
Rebecca Evans studies kelp and marine food webs in the Arctic. Now, the Arctic isn't exactly the first place you think of when talking about an underwater forest, but the kelp she studies has been able to adapt to the harsh conditions of the Arctic.
Yeah, so I did a bit of research and I found that kelp have special strategies to be able to survive the freezing temperatures and the darkness too. They can even grow under the sea ice. Despite these crazy cool adaptations, kelp in the Arctic is still a bit of a mystery to researchers.
There isn't a lot of baseline information about coastal marine food webs. This baseline information will be able to help us understand how these Arctic ecosystems and these coastal ecosystems are going to be impacted by climate change.
These kelp are already living in an extreme environment, but now they have to deal with climate change?
What makes kelp forests even more vulnerable to climate change is that they are stationary.
So unlike most life in the ocean, kelp is stuck in place, which means it's directly impacted by everything around it, which is super important in the Arctic, where climate change is hitting harder and faster than anywhere else.
So Erica, climate change is driving the loss of kelp in the Arctic. What about on other coastlines? Are we seeing similar impacts?
So basically, yes. Climate change is impacting kelp on different coastlines. Take here in Nova Scotia, for example.
So kelp really are the foundation of a diverse and thriving ecosystem here on the East Coast.
So the bad news is kelp has been declining on the East Coast. That's in large part due to an invasive species Conrad and his team have been studying.
So this invasive species goes by the catchy name of Membranipara membranacea.
If you didn't catch that, it's Membranipara membranacea.
But it's actually more commonly known by the easier name of lacy crust bryozoan.
These lacy crusts start their lives as tiny little larvae that float through the ocean currents. They attach themselves to kelp where they grow like sheet-like colonies that cover the surface of the kelp blade.
The problem is that colonies of lacy crust on the kelp weaken the kelp tissue and leave the kelp vulnerable to being ripped apart during periods of heavy wave action.
And it's only getting worse with more frequent storms caused by climate change, which, as you can imagine, is not good for the kelp.
One of the main findings of my research was that temperature is the main driver of the abundance of this lacy crust bryozoan.
We still don't know that much about this relatively new species, which is why Conrad wanted to study it for his master's thesis.
So continued research on the lacy crust and kelp might start to unlock some answers about how we can best preserve the kelp that we have left.
Protecting kelp is really important, but it's not just good for ocean life, it's also good for us. And that's because kelp and other species of seaweed can actually help us to fight the very climate change that they're threatened by. And that's something that Majid is looking at here on the West Coast.
So the sugar kelp itself, these are super fast growing plants. They're constantly hungry. They're eating all the nutrients around they can, carbon, nitrogen. It's a natural filter for the ocean, essentially.
Yeah, so kelp filters ocean water, which helps maintain healthy levels of nutrients. It also stores carbon, which is incredibly important for fighting climate change.
And this process is something that Majid knows really well, because over the last few years, he's been running his own kelp farm.
A kelp farm?
Yeah, a farm where he grows and harvests kelp under the ocean's surface.
So we're not only sequestering carbon in the sediment underneath the farm, but we're also sequestering carbon in the plant itself that we're farming, cultivating, and taking out of the ocean.
After Majid and his team harvest the kelp, it can be used for everything from agricultural feed to fertilizer, construction material, and even a food source for us humans. It turns out that kelp farming is not only not harming the ocean, it actually has a net positive for coastal health.
Whether planted by kelp farmers like Majid or growing naturally in our coastal environments, kelp clearly has a vital role to play.
Kelp just supports so many other organisms, both in the ocean and out of the ocean, and protecting them protects us.
We don't know most things about the ocean. We need to fully understand the biology and ecology of the world of seaweed. So we've got a big task ahead of us and a lot of questions to ask. If we do it right, this could be it. This could change the world.
Thanks so much for watching. Check out our other videos and don't forget to subscribe.